any concerns about getting to rural communities or getting to underrepresented minorities who've been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic?
Well, this has been a very high priority for us, frankly, from day one. We have worked very hard as the clinical trials that were aiming to demonstrate the efficacy and safety of this vaccine were being run to make sure that we engage with all minority populations in the country to ensure and engage them to come and participate into the clinical trials in order to be as inclusive as possible so that the data from the clinical trials be representative of the totality of the population of our country. And that engagement, which really happened at the level of the communities through the community leaders and the NIH and the Surgeon General and many others have played a critical role in helping us engage with all our minority populations. We hope we'll continue that engagement now that vaccines are approved and vaccines will be used. But again, practically at the immunization point, it's really each state and the health authority within that particular state that are in charge of deciding who gets the vaccine, where it goes, how many doses go there. We expect them to prioritize the minority population, which unfortunately, as you know, are much more hard hit by this pandemic than others.
Is there any difference between the effectiveness of the Moderna versus the Pfizer vaccine? So if I got a choice, if one should ever have a choice, which we don't right now, should I choose one or the other?
There is absolutely nothing that I have seen so far in the effectiveness data or the adverse event side effects data that would allow you to make a decision about one versus the other. Now, it's early days. The vaccines are incredibly similar, but they're not identical. So in addition to monitoring the safety, we are going to continue to monitor the effectiveness because same thing, what happens in a clinical trial doesn't always exactly explain what's going to happen when it's in every corner of the United States. Now, there is one important difference between the vaccines. Their storage and handling are quite different. So the Pfizer vaccine is packaged in large pizza boxes, and it is packaged frozen. And that means that for some communities, for some healthcare workers, it just isn't practical, especially, for example, if you're in a really rural area of the country. It may be that your health department says, that Pfizer vaccine is actually hard to get out to every corner. And the Moderna vaccine, because it doesn't require such stringent temperature and it's packaged in smaller quantities, it may be easier for health departments to get that out to certain parts of the population. So not only may you not have a choice because both vaccines aren't there, but you might not have a choice, especially in these early days, because of how the operations are rolling out.
Dr. Smith, you will be the chair of the BidenHarris Equity Task Force. Tell us a little bit, please, about this position, and particularly we're interested in the priorities that you will focus on that are relevant to COVID-19.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tuxen. It's a great pleasure to have the chance to talk to you about this task force. I think this is such an important moment for us in our country. This is going to be the first time that there is a task force focused on equity specifically coming out of this COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, everyone knows that disparities didn't show up during this pandemic. They predate. We know this is the result of structural inequities, racism, and racial injustice in our country. And here's an opportunity for us to think not only about what we need to get to the other side of COVID-19, all of us, really and truly, but even beyond. And so, this task force really is informed by the vice president-elect. When Senator Harris put forward legislation to create a task force such as this, we're really excited that President-elect Biden is going to execute this task force into existence on day one. We're looking to all the things that we know matter: access to high quality healthcare. We're thinking about better data, quite frankly, so we know exactly where we are in terms of the disparities and the success of our interventions. But we also will look to the states where there are great models. So many states and local municipalities have stood up task forces in this time that are having success. And so a lot of work to do. Our list is long, but we're looking forward to doing that in partnership.
In regard to that, a lot of us at the Black Coalition Against COVID appreciate the importance of elements like housing and food security and so forth. Do you think you'll have a chance to reach out and partner with other agencies outside of HHS?
Yeah, we're very excited about this. So the social determinants of health, I mean, here's the opportunity for us to take a whole of government approach. We know this is going to be key and critical, and that is really why the task force, we think, can be a great platform to advance some of those collaborations we know are key.
This pandemic has exposed the many health inequities and disparities that we heard about now for the last couple of months, and we hear about it every time we have a crisis in this country. So how do we address this now moving forward?
Well, I'm really glad you asked that. And, you know, I would say that I imagine that many of the folks that are watching not only have heard about it in the last few months, they see it every day when they go to work and in all of their clinical practice, because it's confronts them. I think for us moving forward, this gives us an opportunity and frankly a responsibility to use this time to address and to the root causes of the health inequities we're seeing. It's not a surprise that, you know, many of our communities and populations of color are experiencing this disproportionate burden because of the disproportionate burden of health harming exposures that they had before. So what we need to do is get to the root causes of how those things played out. And so our role in the CDC Foundation and with our partners is to really accelerate that. I believe that this gives us an opportunity to focus on building up communities, to focus on building resiliency now that we have people's attention and people, you know, can see the connections that we all have to each other. And we're focused on doing that.
Now, the vaccine is going to be given at pharmacists, at pharmacies in the country as well. That's one of the distribution outlets, especially when you look at the long-term care facilities, et cetera. What role are pharmacists going to play in ensuring, again, that there's equitable distribution and as well really impacting in terms of follow-up, et cetera, and how is that going to be coordinated?
Well, certainly early on, many of those pharmacists are going to be actually going into the long-term care facilities. So to actually do the vaccinations in those facilities, that's particularly important for the Pfizer vaccine because of the ultra cold storage requirement. It may be a less so with the Moderna product. Having said that, every long-term care facility has a physician who's involved in the care of those facilities. And I would encourage all of us who are providing care for seniors and long-term care patients to make sure that you know what the plans are, that you've linked up with those pharmacies, because you know you're still responsible at the end of the day for the clinical care required in those facilities. And to that extent, I think you ought to make those linkages.
Could you speak to the special challenges that physicians from the Native American community face during this COVID-19 pandemic and faced with the COVID vaccine distribution?
Yes, absolutely. I'd like to say first, Sagoli Scano, and that's hello and peace from the land of the Haudenosaunee and from Upstate Medical University. Native Americans within the United States have some unique challenges in terms of the vaccine distribution itself. And first and foremost, it's trust within our federal government, trust within the Indian Health Service, which provides health care to the Native American population. But also that is overcoming the lack of resources that we have in Indian country, lack of funding in terms of health care, but also things that we don't think about, certainly in rural areas, lack of access to care and lack of a distribution system itself. But most importantly, in terms of vaccine distribution for the Native American population, it's the protection of our elders.